Hello and welcome back to Beyond the To-Do List, a podcast about productivity. I'm your host, Eric Fisher, and I'm excited to welcome to the show Sara Sherman. She's a classical musician, educator, and author of Resonant Minds, the transformative power of music. In this conversation, we talk about how music is much more than just background noise. It can be a tool for mindfulness, focus, and connection. Sara explains how we can use music to improve our productivity, create community, and even enhance our mental health. So whether you're listening alone or with others, this conversation will inspire you to approach music with a deeper purpose. And if you're looking for ways to use music to enrich your life and boost your well-being, this episode with Sara Sherman is for you. Well, it is my privilege to welcome to the show Sara Sherman. Sara, welcome to Beyond the To-Do List.
Thank you for having me.
I couldn't have been more thrilled when I found out about this book, Resonant Minds, the transformative power of music, one note at a time. And, pre-recording, I was kind of sharing how I am a fan of music. Music is very much a part of my life. There are only certain genres I don't necessarily gravitate towards, but I won't do any music shaming here. To each their own. But you're a classical musician and an educator and now an author. And so obviously this book makes sense for you to write from a music lover perspective. But how did you get into this deeper side of music is much more than just something we listen to for pleasure?
Absolutely. I'm going to start with the beginning of how I started creating these interactive experiential learning concerts. As a classical pianist, I was still performing all the time when my daughter was born. So as a new mom, I was bringing her to all these concerts. And there was one in particular, I was soloist with the Chelsea Symphony playing a Shostakovich piano concerto. And my daughter was 4 months old, in a little Snuggie on my husband, and the only baby in the audience. And I had invited a lot of new parent friends at the time, and they all said they were going to come, and then they all canceled, which I understand and I respect. But at the same time, I was like, I was a soloist with orchestra. This was a great concert for me and a great experience. And they all had these concerns. What if my baby cries? What if they need to have a diaper change? What if they're hungry? And that all makes sense. And so from looking around, there was this big gap in New York City where I'm based for all ages to really experience high caliber music and let children be children. And so from there, it started this concert series, Mozart for Munchkins. This was in 2017. And it's really been a journey to see the growth of Mozart for Munchkins that's really shaped this book, to learn that music is not just this sit down, let's listen. It's something to be experienced, it's something to be felt, and it's something to communicate and connect us all.
That's incredible. And yes, I think one of the things from zipping a little further ahead from 2017 into, 2020 through 2022, 23, no, earlier than that. But there's like a 1.5 to 2 year window there where it was very like no concerts, not really doing live music. I became very aware of how much of not just hey, I want to go listen to music. It was more the experience is what I'm missing going to a concert of any kind, and how meaningful that is, not just for the sake of the music in and of itself, but going with who I go with and us interacting with it. And I mean, there's different genres have different kind of expressions of that, but just the importance and the power of it was something that just came right to the forefront.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There are studies that show, I'm going to go a little bit with paralleling the book here, that adults practice mindfulness or meditation, only about 14% of adults in America. But over 80% of adults listen to music at least 3 hours a day. And even younger generations go up to 4 to 5 hours a day in some studies. And that's huge. So no wonder you were feeling this gap in 2020 when music was taken away. And what the book tries to do is to create those experiences in ways that we can take the music out of the concert and into our home lives. So that experience, we call it groove. When you're listening to music and your brain waves actually start to sync with the people that you're you're with, because the music has a certain amount of beats per minute, and it creates this feeling of connectivity. And we all miss that and all kind of yearned for that, I think, especially during the pandemic time. And so the book goes through how to take these tools and create your own musical toolbox, conceptual toolbox, and what to do to help music, to have music to help us with focus, with emotional and social awareness, and even for creating community and building leadership.
Yeah. You even talk about this in the book in terms of how integral music is for our well-being. And you just named a bunch of different kind of angles and aspects, one that it applies to and we could go into. And I think, this is a productivity show, so I definitely want to touch on like, how do we use music towards better productivity or habits? But I think one of the things for me that I don't want to say it's a bad thing, but I think one of the things for me when I hear people, I just put music on in the background, and I'm like, like you're kind of just halfway tasting the dish then, metaphorically. And yet I find I do that too sometimes and with certain things. So I don't know if that's something that you've found is true with that research.
Yes, and I don't think there's anything wrong with necessarily putting music on in the background, but it's the way that we purposefully or intentionally put that music on in the background. And why do we do that? And what type of playlist are we using to create a mood? Is it a background music because you're cooking a meal and you want to have some fun? Is it because you need to sit down and focus, and so you have a soundtrack to help you do that? Without going too much in the science side, I am not a neuroscientist. I'm a pianist first, but I've done my due diligence. When we have music on in the background, it activates our default mode network. And that's the space where we go for creativity, for kind of free-flowing thinking. It's really important for problem solving. And so having that music on in the background is important. But there are ways that we can purposefully do that to get to that state of purposefully passive listening, is what I like to call it, so that we're passive listening with a purpose. And we can practice that by, I'm classical, so I'm going to go to that classical comparison, but something I like to do, Debussy is a beautiful composer, abstract composer. If you know art, think of Monet. It's a artwork of sound, and sit down and draw. And if drawing or coloring or painting doesn't resonate with you, then maybe sit down and doodle or write, stare at a wall. But the idea of having this wash of sound over us with a purpose is really important to then help us learn how to actively listen for focus.
Yeah, that actually makes sense. Sometimes people think, much like how we feel this pressure to always be doing something productive, right? Isn't that like, that's not saying that being bored isn't productive. It's creative. It's letting the mind breathe, etc. And so there's musical kind of components to that as well, where it's like just having something playing and getting lost in it for the sake of doing that and the effect of that.
Yes, I'm going to throw a question back at you. You mentioned at the start certain music for when you sit down to do your email. Is it always the same song?
No, not at all. It rotates.
Interesting.
Although, then there are certain things where it's like, okay, like I have a certain playlist for like working out. Like I'll get on the treadmill and it is a set playlist because it's like, it starts at one place and then it goes to another place and it, lifts you up. And then it's like, okay, now by about this point in time, I'm a little bit more tired. And then, in the second wind, and that's a different track. And so kind of like that.
Yeah. So I think that's wonderful. You mentioned playlists, and in the toolbox, I believe in creating and curating our own playlists for different parts of the day or for different behaviors or moods that we want to boost with a playlist, and that they're ever changing and they adapt with us as we change because we're changeable beings. What's interesting about music in particular and something like email, mine is Bach cello suites. Again, I'll try not to always make classical music references, or Taylor Swift Shake It Off is a big playing piece in my household. My daughter knows if I'm in a bad mood, Taylor Swift Shake It Off. She's like, Alexa, play Shake It Off. I had to make sure it wouldn't turn on. And it's created this habit. And so we can create musical habits, these bite-sized habits throughout our day through repetition. Because when we Think about brushing your teeth. You didn't always know how to brush your teeth, but after doing it enough or riding a bike, it goes from our explicit memory. And then we have these associations formed and it goes to our implicit memory. And all of a sudden it just becomes habit. We don't think about, oh, 1 foot down and then the other foot down as we ride our bike. We just do it. And we can use music to actually create that same type of behavior. So in my household, I mentioned Bach cello suites. I have 2 young children. They know when we play that type of music, hey, it's time to sit down and we're going to do some work or we're going to have some quiet time. Even if I'm playing loud music and my son needs a moment, he'll ask for it because we've had this kind of cycle going from our explicit memory to our implicit memory to creating this habit with positive reinforcement. It releases dopamine and makes us feel good, which then brings us motivation, and we do it again and again.
Yeah. One of the things that I've even heard of was, and again, it's more like a 3-minute to 5-minute song where if you just play that same song over and over and over again for like half an hour or so, like you kind of wear a mental groove. It feels somewhat similar to that. Some people are like, I would never do that. I would get bored. I would hate that song after I heard it too many times. And actually what was funny was we were driving. This is a couple weeks ago. My daughter is in college and she was home. We were going to a funeral over that weekend and we're riding in the van for a couple hours. And I had shuffle going on my phone. And there was a song that came on that she said, oh no, it's my alarm clock song. It's the song she has set as what plays to wake her up in the morning. And I was like, oh, I was impressed because it was a well chosen song that starts quiet and then kind of gets a little bit louder. And it's one of those things where it's like immediately it made her think like she was laying in bed and she was supposed to wake up and again, it's kind of like the scent thing too, where scent is so tied into memory. And you smell something and you're immediately back home at grandma's kitchen where the cookies are coming out of the oven or something like that.
Absolutely. But do you have a song too that you can think of where maybe you're baking those cookies or a soundtrack that you had growing up or whatever it might be, even now during holidays that you usually play that bring back a memory?
Not a specific song, but anytime. So my grandfather and my grandmother both, I guess, he constantly was playing on a grand piano in their house, big black one. And I just remember him sitting there and playing and me being underneath the piano, laying on my back, looking up at it and hearing the deep resonance of it like through my whole body. Often when I hear piano music of that classical type, I can be right back there again in that moment, laying underneath the piano on the carpet.
That's amazing. Well, I think a game I like to do with audiences a lot when we're creating these experience live is to have them think of the first thing that comes to mind. Everything from Jingle Bells to Jaws, which is also Baby Shark. You can tell oftentimes just from the first 2 notes, da-dum, and people know what it is. You don't have to go further. And because you have these memory attachments to these songs right away, and this visceral reaction, our generation thinks of Jaws, not Baby Shark, but now 30 years from now, when all these kids hear those 2 notes, are going to go, Baby Shark. And so music has the ability to live deep within us when we hear something repeated so many times. And exactly what you're saying about the smell, the same exact thing happens with a piece of music. For me, one of the first times I realized that especially classical music doesn't have to be so serious was on a car ride with my father. And we were playing Ode to Joy, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, at the max volume in the car, and singing along with animal sounds. And so we're going like oink, 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 oink. I'm sure classical musicians would be very upset to hear that. But at the same time, I was maybe 7 or 8. And it was something that I remember so viscerally that this is a huge piece of music, but we're going to really internalize it. And so I think the more ways that we can create memory attachments and these positive associations with music that we can come back to time and time again. And that goes back to curating your personalized playlist. Hey, I'm feeling down. Let me pick this song because I know it always boosts my mood. The better we become at listening to ourselves.
Yeah. And let's get into some of that practical steps here. I know that, integrating music into our daily lives with these kind of strategies, you've given some, you've mentioned playlists and even some of the, Shake It Off, for example. What are some ways that we can come up with what's going to work for us when it comes to that?
I think it depends on what you are looking for. So I really like to focus on focus as one of the pillars. Community building, that what you mentioned about 2020 and wanting that feeling of community and being at a concert, and also movement breaks, I think fall into that. The social emotional awareness, becoming aware of our emotions. So for focus, I think there's a lot of different ways that we can pick music. Again, I go to Bach, but I don't know if you know Sigur Rós.
Yes.
You mentioned U2 earlier before we even got online. There are some songs from U2 that have these amazing instrumental openings. And so it's finding a piece that resonates with you, because my musical selections are not necessarily your musical selections, and that's okay. But finding a piece that you can maybe come back to time and time again and really feel your feet on the floor, grounded underneath you, and just breathe with the music. And not just breathe with the music like, okay, I'm breathing, but really intentionally think about breathing with the beats and breathing in for 2 and out for 2. If it's a song that seems to have 4 beats, those tend to work best, 4 beats per measure. And coming back to that piece time and time again to again create that positive habit for that piece of music as a moment of focus and a moment of connecting in your daily life. And so for focus, like I mentioned, the default mode and purposefully passive listening, that's something I like to do for active listening, actively listening to the music and breathing along with it.
Yeah. Because there's that passive versus that active is kind of, and again, I kind of said, oh no, you're passively listening. And I think that I don't necessarily think that same way these days. But one of the other things that I noticed was more recently, last year and a half, I was lacking. It's almost like I noticed that, I'm not getting enough vitamin D. Well, let's put some more of that back into your life. I noticed that with music and noticed I was listening to way more podcasts. And so I said, you can still do that, but you really enjoy music, and music has so much more is subjective, but has a deeper, more impactful, just aspect to it. And just having deep roots in music from my parents and my grandparents, as I mentioned, felt like something was missing. And so returning to that.
I love that. Historically speaking, going back, some of our first instruments date back to the Neanderthals, and it's this early flute that was made from a vulture bone. And that's been debated over time, but some research shows that our first early communication was through music beyond having formalized speech. So when you talk about going back to music, it's something that's viscerally a part of us and a part of our beings for centuries, which is really interesting to think about, that it's not just something, I like this, it's a part of us. And so this idea of purposefully using music, whether it's again for that purposeful passive listening, for focus, for any of these things, we all have that inside of us and this inkling to use music. It's just a matter of whether or not we go back to that tool time and time again.
Yeah, I definitely think the communication is key. Sometimes it's even, this is a weird way to put it, but maybe not. Music can help us communicate with ourselves. Sometimes our thoughts and feelings are this huge ocean underneath the surface, and we just don't know how to interpret it. But music kind of helps us tap into it and make sense of what we're thinking and feeling in a way that before we have words or ways to express it, we can start to get in touch with it first, I guess.
Yeah. Yes, I love that. And I agree. And I'm going to tell a story about one of the programs that we've done with a neurodivergent community. And it was a school assembly. And we have this segment where we talk about music and emotions. And we have the students come up on stage. And since they couldn't verbally tell us how they're feeling, we usually have them pick an emotion and an instrument. And we try to play what they're feeling. And they were up there with, some of them had aids, some of them had the computers around their neck. We also had some cards, and they were able to point to an emotion that they were feeling or that they wanted to hear as a form of expression and point to the instruments that they wanted to play it. And we did that. And then the joy and the communication without needing words in that moment was so amazing, because these kids couldn't communicate with us any other way. And it was really, really special. I think the power of music to be a communicator without using words. We hear all the time about music being the universal language, and it's absolutely true. One of the studies, there was an article in the New York Times last summer about mindfulness practices and how they're not necessarily working, particularly for adolescent kids in schools. And this was a reaction to me that was, but what about music? What if you do the same type of work, but to put music behind it? Because anybody that has anxiety or tends to be depressed, and this is all backed by research, when they're left alone with silence and their own thoughts, it tends to magnify those feelings. And especially middle school, teenage kids, that's a hard time. And so if you're left alone with silence and saying, let's breathe like this, well, what if I can't breathe with this right now? Oh, I had an exchange with that person. And did I say something stupid? And all of a sudden you're left with your thoughts. And it's a scary place to be sometimes. But if you put on a piece of music to connect the students and the kids together, same thing with adults. It really doesn't have to be an age cutoff. You all of a sudden are connecting to people without speaking, and you're not left alone with those feelings necessarily of anxiety or of depression. You're all of a sudden connecting without words, which is something that I think is really beautiful, and we don't use it enough as a form of communication.
Yeah, and I think that regardless of if the music has lyrics or not, or whatever genre, there's this kind of transcending the composer or the creator of it has what they're expressing. And there's an ability for us as the listener or the experiencer of it to connect with and interpret what they're thinking and feeling and internalize it or own it or experience it in a resonant way. I love by the way, I really love that the title is called that. It resonates with us in a way that, one, we're not alone. Two, and I mean, I could go on and on. We're not alone. The beauty of it, the acknowledging of just again, literal resonance. Maybe it's loud enough for if there's certain vibrational stuff going on, et cetera, without going into too much like, woo-woo or science stuff, but that it exists. And we often don't pay attention to that being as powerful as it should be acknowledged to be.
Absolutely. And I think it goes back the 1700s. There was a treatise called the Doctrine of Affections, that we only have 7 basic emotions. And here they are. And let's create music based on, joy, sadness, jealousy, anger. And it goes through these emotions. And there were certain sounds that evoked these emotions. And you were expected to understand that this interval really made you feel this way, which is really interesting that music was composed at some point in time with that thought in mind. And now fast forward to where we are today, music has that ability to change our mood. So if I'm, like I said before, Taylor Swift, Shake It Off, or the other day, we were in a hot to go with Chapel Roan. It doesn't, again, have to be classical music. And I'm throwing these out there. But it's about finding what can shift that mood for you and what music does that. If you are feeling low, and not you, but at large, we all have those moments. And sometimes it feels really good to belt out a sad song. But the trouble with that is that when we are feeling sad and we tend to play sad music, it tends to keep us there as opposed to playing something ridiculous that helps us get out of that mood, that makes us want to move, which then releases some endorphins. And we all know that that makes us feel good.
Yeah. And not to knock it, but sometimes the sad songs are what we want to listen to because that's what we're experiencing. And again, it kind of has that resonance or even like a camaraderie type effect of, you know what, it's healthy to go through the grieving process, whatever of what that might be, if that's happens to be what the case is. Just understanding that, not speeding through it and cheating the process, but fully experiencing it, knowing it's one of many emotions or one of many states to be in.
Yeah, I agree. I think I mentioned teenagers before, and I think understanding then a way to not get stuck and to only go on that loop of sad songs. That's a place we don't want to visit, where we're regularly only listening to those songs that might bring us down. It is important to process that grief or whatever emotion it might be. And music is a beautiful way to do that. We were talking about memories before, and there are songs that make me sad, even if I'm not feeling sad. but they bring back memories of a tough time or somebody that I loved and is no longer with me. And it's about recognizing that music has the potential to do that. And then what are we going to do with it? How are we going to use it? I love what you said about acknowledging it. But also, I think it is important to not get stuck in it.
Yeah. Sorry, this made me think of that movie, John Cusack, High Fidelity, where I think it's near the end. He says this funny quote that's always stuck with me. Did I listen to pop music because I was miserable, or was I miserable because I listened to pop music? And it kind of, that puts me in that because I was a teenager when that came, a late teenager, college age. And when that came out, and it was kind of in that mode, it was like, oh, wait, that's a real question to ask here, to be self-aware for a moment.
That's really funny. I think I actually haven't seen that movie, or I haven't seen it in so long. So thank you for that. I'll have to go back to it. The book has QR codes throughout. So if we're talking about a piece of music, you can use your phone and go to that QR code and it pops up to a website. So you can hear the music we're talking about. And that's, again, not to say that my musical selections should be everybody's musical selections, but it's a starting place. And so even with that pop music and that idea, am I miserable because of this? Well, let me try something else. Let me see Eric, what do you recommend for me to listen to today? It's about being open-minded to different musical selections.
Yeah. So we talked about kind of integrating music into our life as kind of I don't want to say holistic, but I guess that does fit. It's well-being, like it's mental, it's emotional, it's cognitive, it's all of the above, and physical. If you get up and dance like you should, or move to it, I guess you don't have to just dance. Movement can be many different things. I love listening to music in the car. Road trips with a great playlist is fantastic for me, sometimes even more than podcasts. I mentioned smell and memory. So there's the whole thing of like, if you're eating or smelling like peppermint while you're studying, and then if you can do that again while you're taking the test. But I don't think that someone's going to let you listen to music while you take the test. So, but maybe music for studying, or when you're trying to like do deep reading or different things like that. Anything in that realm?
Yeah. So I think it goes back to the Breathing with Bach, which is one of my favorite things. But it also, you know what an earworm is? It's that song, that gets stuck in your head over and over and over again. And part of that, it's our phonological loop. And so that's our working memory. And that's where we retain verbal information. It's our language processing and our learning. And that's why mnemonic devices are so helpful, because it has that repetitive sound besides those jingles. And so I think you asked about studying or whatever it might be. If there's something that we need to remember, whether it's for a test, whether it's for something we just really want to get better at, the more associations that we can create with whatever it is we're trying to learn, the better. The same in any subject in school, which is something we haven't talked about yet, but I really believe in creating more interdisciplinary curriculums, because the more attachments we have, whether it's for music, whether it's for art, whether it's for history, or even math, the more likely we are to retain information. And that does have to do with repetition. It has to do with bringing that explicit memory to our implicit memory to create this habit. And if we think about a habit, it's also really something that we've learned.
And it actually makes me think of something else too, is just one, you've got classrooms and you've got learning going on, but also like large groups, like recitals or concerts, etc. And the difference between sitting by yourself, whether it's speakers or headphones, but also if you're sitting or, you're attending something that is a large group. Do you have any insight as to like the difference between solo versus communal listening?
Yes. So actually, studies have shown that when we listen to music collectively in a group, we have more serotonin that is released and endorphin that is released versus a solo experience. You still have that. But because when you're with people, it also has that oxytocin, that bonding hormone, that it tends to be something that is even magnified more. So also with groove, like I mentioned earlier, when we're listening collectively to music with a certain amount of beats per minute, our brain waves all sync, whether we realize it or not. If you and I are in the same room listening to a piece of music, our brainwaves are going to start to synchronize. And that's so fascinating when you think about it, that we have these neural synapses that are happening and we don't realize it. But what that means is that we're creating community and we're creating this moment of connectivity. There are the elements that we like to do in workshops or when working in concerts and these interactive or assemblies in schools that get people up and dancing or keep people moving. We do a lot of drum circles, which also then works on your active listening. And so trying to combine as many elements as possible. But these shared experiences, and when you can use things like your active listening, call and response that combine everything, it really, really helps make all of these attachments and positive associations to music. And again, hopefully something that people want to come back to. Ooh, I listened to this song in this moment with that people and it was wonderful. And I remember I felt so great afterwards. So then maybe when you're alone and you listen to that, there is a moment where you can bring that feeling back, even if you're by yourself.
Yeah. And it makes me think of ceremonial and or religious experiences in a way.
Yeah, we have a whole section actually on spirituality because it's so controversial in so many ways. But at the same time, it's really simple when you break it down to that spirituality is different for everybody. And spirituality can be something as simple as a lullaby that a parent sings to their child time and time again that goes back to goes through generations. There's a song called Scarlet Ribbons. I think it's from the 1940s, 1930s. Nobody knows it, but my grandma sang it. My mom sang it. I sang it. My daughter knows it. And so now it's gone through 4 generations and it has this element of spirituality to it for me because of where it comes from. Now, when we talk about a religious aspect, some of the first music goes back to Gregorian chant. And so when we take that to then where we are today with music and gospel singing, music's been an integral part of religious services and ceremonies for centuries. There's an interview in the book with a wonderful superintendent named Gregory Hutchins, and he talks about how he wasn't always religious, but as he's grown up, he's become more and more religious, and he's moved a lot. And every time he goes to find a different church that resonates with him, it has to have good music. And he won't go to a church, even if it has the best sermon, but it doesn't have great music. And I think there's really something remarkable about that. You can have the best background, the best whatever it might be, but where's the music to connect everyone?
Yeah. And it's one of those things where you don't want to be too choosy, but I can understand, like, if you've got your particulars, especially when a thing like music is so resonant, there's that word again, it just makes sense that you would say, well, no, that's going to be the thing that I hold out for. That's going to be the thing that I'm going to look for, not to get so stuck in our own ruts. And in fact, that's one of the things I wanted to talk about was I mentioned there are certain genres I don't necessarily like or aren't my favorite, but that's not to say that there aren't certain aspects or certain artists or songs in that I don't gravitate towards more than others in those genres. What are some ways that we can break out of our musical comfort zones and expand our musical repertoire?
It's a great question. And we all have music we gravitate to and think that this is what serves me in this purpose and I don't need to listen to anything else. So it's a tough question. It's like we all get stuck in our ruts, as you said. And part of it is just listening with an open mind. You said you have certain music that you don't like, but listen to it. Why not listen to it? I think the music that maybe doesn't serve us in our own minds has a larger chance of being given a chance if somebody recommends it to us. When we listen to music as a family, like I mentioned, I have 2 young kids and we take turns, and it doesn't matter whether my song wants to play a song about hot dogs or flying unicorns, we listen to it, even if it drives me nuts. And same thing for all of us, whether then I want to listen to something classical or something else, we give everybody's music a chance. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to put it on necessarily on my own when they're not there, but it's giving it that place to be given a chance. And with that, like, I don't particularly love country music, but my sisters love country music. And so I try to give it a chance when I'm with them. And I know it's not something that I'm going to listen to on my own, but it's about respecting other people's musical choices and just having that open mind. My son has a way of saying, if you don't listen to it again. And if you still don't listen to it or like it, listen to it a second time, and then maybe a third time, and maybe you like it, and maybe you don't, but at least you've given it a chance.
Well, okay. Now I know you're raising him right, because he can say something like that.
Either that or he's a good parrot. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there you go. Yes. Well, you mentioned country music, so I guess I will confess that is one of the ones that I do not gravitate towards. However, there's some of the originators of that, like, say, Johnny Cash, where I'm like, oh, I love Johnny Cash. So it's like, but see, if I had not given it a chance and not, immersed myself in it and given it a fair shake, I wouldn't have found some of the ways that it can make me feel, can make me think, can center me, ground me, bring me back to memories with friends and such, things like that. So you have to.
Yeah. And with that, so Johnny Cash is, you're right. I said I don't like country music, but Johnny Cash, he is iconic, of course.
Yeah.
But if you then put on a playlist, or you're curating your own playlist, and you have a purpose for Johnny Cash in that playlist, and then you play another song that you're not as familiar with, but maybe I'm going to give this one a chance, and it's surrounded by music that is familiar to you and familiar music that you're comfortable with, I think the music that you're not familiar with has a larger chance when it's surrounded by music that that you like. And again, I'm going to throw the word out there, and that resonates with you because it's surrounded by the familiar. And in order to get out of the familiar and out of our comfort zones, it's easier to do that in little bite-sized doses than putting on a playlist that you're not going to like. Just try one song at a time.
That's a good point. And I've experienced that to be true because I've started up kind of a shuffle where I let the AI tell me what to do. I'll start with a song I like, and then I'll let it go, and it picks what's next, and it goes in and out of things that are familiar and unfamiliar. And I will hear things I've never heard before that I suddenly like, wait, who is this? And I look and I'm like, that's so-and-so? And I'm like, no way. I'm like, I wouldn't have given them a chance, but because this song fits kind of seamlessly in this playlist between two songs I love, now I think I'm in an insert name here, fan, and maybe I'll dig a little deeper.
But within that, whatever streaming service you're using, it's following your algorithms of the familiar. So with those new songs that it's putting in there, are they the similar genre to what you were listening to, or will it be something completely out there that you aren't familiar with?
It's actually kind of, I'm impressed by how it is kind of, it's not exactly the same genre, and it kind of floats in and out of different genres, I would say, but it does it in a way that's not jarring. Like it'll play something it'll play something more jazz like. Let me I'm trying to think of what something would be. Sir Duke by Stevie Wonder. That's got more jazz elements, brass and horns and things like that in it. And then it'll go to something else that kind of has some brass and horns in it, but is maybe not that exact same genre. And then something familiar from that song then goes to the one that I never heard before, but I thought, oh, wait, what is this? And then after that, it's very interesting. I mean, there's probably, I'd love to do some more studies on this, but like the AI algorithms as to what they're picking, beats per minute, genre, elements of the music, artists, etc., and how they're varying it and integrating familiar and unfamiliar. And that's probably going to vary. That algorithm is going to vary service to service.
Yeah, I think part of it also changes based on if you fast forward, say they do put on a new song and you say, nah, I don't want to listen to this. Let's skip to the next one. Obviously, it remembers that and it does that. And I do think there is something there that keeps us back on the feedback loop of the familiar. So even if it's something that's new to you, it's within this same genre of what you're listening. It's not all of a sudden necessarily going to play, let's say, hip hop or bluegrass or something that's really out there from what it is. And so I still think there's this way of when we curate our own playlists, I think playlists that streaming services use and create based on what we're listening to are really wonderful for a starting place to then really individualize what's best for us. And then thinking again of that new song or something that is totally out there that you're not as familiar with as this little digestible bite of something you're going to stick in there as something to try.
Yeah. One of the other things that comes to mind is we're talking about all these different genres, and I'm incredibly grateful to having grown up with that memory of my grandfather playing that grand piano. One of the things that makes me think of is that he eventually had Alzheimer's, but it was onset late in life. He was one of the first ones of all his siblings to have it, and a bunch of the other ones had it too. But he was around, and he still, let me put it this way, even when he was starting to fade a little bit cognitively, he could still sit down and play. And it was amazing to still have him do that for so long. Can you talk a little bit about not just short-term and learning memory, like we've already addressed, but long-term mental health / cognitive health and the effects music has on that?
Yeah, I'm not a neuroscientist, but this is something that I find really fascinating. And there's a big movement right now towards the neuro arts. So really combining the neuroscience with the arts to use music as medicine and music as a way to heal. We see that in palliative care and hospice care more than we ever have before. And in terms of Alzheimer's patients, the memory attachments that we talked about earlier that are formed with a piece of music, whether it's from childhood, you have that really visceral memory, which is it's a part of you. Those types of things, when we hear music, like you mentioned, the smell, and it brings you back to cookies or whatever it might be, music has the same capabilities. So when somebody's memory, if they have Alzheimer's or dementia, is fading, that memory from the music is so ingrained in a part of us in a different part of the brain that's accessible in a different way than recall. Like, I don't remember your name, or I don't remember how to button my shirt anymore. It's just a different part of our brain that music is connected to.
Yeah, that's interesting. And different parts of the brain are dedicated to different functions. It's different parts of the brain that control different aspects of what we remember, what we can do, et cetera.
Yeah. Along that lines, there's movements in doctors' offices and across the country to even call it, I don't remember the exact name, but using the arts as a prescription. So if somebody is struggling with mental health, go walk around a museum and find some artwork. Or if somebody, needs community, go to some concerts and create a sense. And so doctors, or I shouldn't say community, but if they're feeling lonely or isolated. So it's something that I think we're just really beginning to understand the importance of arts, the importance of music in our society to really be prescribed for our well-being.
Yeah. And I love that. I think that's one of the things that, again, I noticed I'm not listening to enough music. There's definitely something off here. I better integrate that back into my life more, and realizing that and the effect that has had. One of the things that I wanted to make sure to bring up is you co-wrote this book. And so your father co-wrote this with you. You can share as much as you want to or not about what that experience is like. But obviously you also generationally had, through him, a musical appreciation awareness. Is there anything regarding that makes sense to share in terms of the formation of the book?
Yeah, for several years, my family and both my parents have been my biggest sounding boards when I put on workshops or programs. I'd call them, what do you think about this? What about this idea? Hey, I'm going to bring kazoos to this and we're going to sing You Are My Sunshine with 200 teachers. Is that insane or should we do it? Always my father would say, you're writing your book. And I said, yeah, okay. No, you're writing your book. It came back to time and time again and eventually said, I don't know if I'm going to write a book without you. It kind of came from being a sounding board for all of these ideas and having this support system, which I'm well aware I was lucky to have my entire life. When I was 11, my parents sent me to Ukraine to study piano. They drove me to countless competitions and concerts. And so it's developed in my life as something, music and my relationship with my family is so intertwined that it was a really natural way for the book to develop. My mom's artwork is in the book. One of my sisters helped with the QR codes and the formation of that. And my other sister is a special education teacher, and she's interviewed about some of her neurodivergent students and how music impacts them on a daily basis. And I think it's just been a gift to be able to have this time to write together. A lot of people say, well, how do you do it? You're so different and this and that, but we have really different strengths. He's an educator. He's been a superintendent of schools for I can't even remember how many years. And so he is a leader in the education field. And in the book, he has a beautiful chapter on leadership and how to use music, kind of from, if you think of a trickle down effect, how do you use music at the top to trickle down then to the principals, to the teachers, then to the students. And it's a really interesting theory. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been a big learning experience to do that as a family or as with my father, but it's something that has been really special.
So in a sense, the book has been a communal experience as well, and now is starting to take on even more of that as people get their hands on it and start to use it and can look at it. So that's very cool. I love hearing all the different aspects of that. And there's so much more, like you alluded to, the chapter about leadership. There's so much more in the book than we could talk about here in this conversation. So I want to make sure people can find the book and where to find out more about what you're doing online and the different things that you're doing. And so where can people find out more about you as well as the book?
Yes. So the book is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. If you just type in Resonant Minds, the Transformative Power of Music, it will come up. The company I run in New York City, Mozart for Munchkins, our name skews young, but we have done workshops for teachers for professional development days. And our idea is to make music an experiential learning environment where these tools that we've talked about today are brought to the forefront and people take away these actionable strategies for them. So if you look at Mozart for Munchkins, we're on Instagram. You can look on our website where the book is also and find out more information there.
Perfect. And I'll make sure to link up to all of that in the show notes for this episode. And Sara, it's been great talking with you. This is not just fascinating, but fun. And I hope that everybody can really dive into this a little bit more and enrich their lives in so many different ways that they may not have entered this conversation knowing about until now. So thank you so much for sharing this and your experiences.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Well, that's another podcast crossed off your listening to-do list. I hope that you enjoyed exploring the role that music has when it comes to productivity and mindfulness and focus and connection and community and mental health. There's so much there. I love music. And of course, I think you can see that Sara does too. And I hope that you are starting to get that more and a deeper understanding of that as well. Even if you already liked music, I hope that you love music and appreciate music now much more than ever. If you found this episode helpful, I would love for you to share this episode with somebody that you know needs to hear it or that you thought of while listening to it. Hit that share button wherever you're listening to this. Send it on over to them. Let them know about it. Do me that favor. Do them that favor. And again, thank you so much for sharing. Thanks again for listening, and I will see you next episode.